we're all crying. One of the things said in there, one of the big mistakes that I picked up real quick was they talked about how the security tightened up at the Olympic Village. Not at all. I was in and out the whole damn time, but the terrorists were in there. In fact, I think they thought I was a terrorist. One of our kids here at Penn State got held up for 2 days by the terrorists. They went to the terrorists went to the wrong floor, and it was the Bahamian team up there, and then they saw the guys and they realized they were in the wrong place. But they held them captive for 2 days. The good side of it was the kid who I had came back to school and got straight A's on writing papers about it. And I said, it's a good thing you wrote content, because if they gave you grades for punctuation, you'd have flunked for sure. He was pretty dumb, actually. Just a little bit. Anyway, at the Olympic Village, when Pre had decided he wasn't going to run in the final, and I was walking along, and I ran into Dillinger, and he needed some help, and he says, so I'm going up to Pre's room to talk with him, so will you come along? So I kind of knew what he wanted. We got in the room, and Pre said, I'm not running, that's it, I'm not running, I'm going to make a protest against the fact that the Israelis have been slaughtered and so forth. So Bill backed off a little bit, and he started out the door. He said, well, the terrorists win. He said, what do you mean they win? He says, well, anybody as famous as you is going to hit every paper in the world, and they're going to claim another victory based on the fact you're not going to run. Pre looks at him and says, I'm running, just like that. He made up his mind right on the spot. Now, in the race itself, his original intention, because we talked earlier with him, was to take it from the line and get a good hot pace going. As they said, they didn't. They kind of loafed for 2 miles or so, and then they picked it up. But his last mile was 4:02. Because I timed it right on the spot. By the way, that's a meter track, and I had to figure out where the mile mark was. And having had a lot of experience with that at the time, I got it pretty close. Well, the mistake he made was, it was a pretty fast pace in that last mile, but he kept mixing it up when he shouldn't have. And part of that had to do with the fact, remember you had the big fight with the AAU? They finally got rid of the AAU. Colleges were the ones stepped on them. They just killed them. They took them right out of existence. And at any rate, that part of it was he didn't get the experience running against those great runners. He was always able to do all the Americans in pretty easy or well within him. So he wasn't getting the kind of experience he needed, and I think that made a difference. If he had been around in '76, I'd have paid him in money to see it, and I haven't paid for an Olympics yet, so you could see that one for sure. But he never got the chance to do it. And it would have been great if he, as I said, if he had the opportunity. If you watch that, and I've seen it several times, that 5,000 meter race, they kept mixing it up at the end. It's already fast as hell, you know what I'm saying, and you're trying to put people down. Ozzie Barron was so well trained. He trained for a couple of months in Mexico, got the altitude training, came back from there and put speed on it. He was just all the way around ready. See, Pre didn't have any of that. He was back in Oregon beating the hell out of all the locals all the time. And I'm sure he figured out what he had to do. There's lots of stuff I could talk about. They mentioned some of the things that happened, but Oregon is known as the grass seed capital of the world, and they burn the fields off in the fall. You know this. So Pre went to city council and talked them into, got them pass a law they couldn't burn anything until after 6 p.m. because it was killing the runners, and they went with him. Later on, they called him up at the state prison. They were having riots up there. And he went up and talked to the guy. Everybody calmed down and solved that problem for him. So that statement that he would probably be in the Oregon Congress was not too far removed, because he was a very influential person. And he wasn't a bad guy, like he'd blast you every now and then, but you kind of got used to it. Greg Fredericks was in there, by the way. They both broke the American record back in '72, and they went. Well, Greg was about a yard behind him, and both of them were all out. Neither one of them had a kick, and Greg was famous for a kick, and Pre knew it, so he ran it fast enough so there was no kick. And they came into, as I said, excuse me, about a yard or two apart, both with an American record at the time. So that's how I got to know him, because he got Greg right away. Instead of being a hot dog, he made Greg jog a victory lap with him. In Oregon, that's a big deal, by the way. They say, Pre's people, oh, you ought to be there when he's running as one of them. They just go crazy. So Greg got to be part of that. Plus, the thing was televised. We were trying to get on the plane later in Portland, and people were grabbing Greg to get autographs all the way up to Portland. I wish Greg were here to tell you a little bit more about him, too, because he got to know him. They went out for our jog off. I said, where'd you go? Over on the Pre trail? He said, no, we never left concrete. So they stayed right in town, I guess because people were grabbing them left and right at the time. Anybody have any questions? I told Mike I could go for 3 hours on free if I had to, but I won't do it.
Does he ever run at Penn State?
No, we almost had him here. We ran down the Pan-African meet at Duke. And he won, but he wouldn't have won, I don't think. Myra Shifter thought he was finished and stopped a lap too soon. And Pre went on and just won the race. And they were getting a team together. It was an AAU team, in fact. And it was hot as hell down there. And he just wasn't ready to stay at Duke for that time. So I went down and talked to him. I said, if you like, you can come up to Penn State. I'll guarantee you about 75 degrees. I lied to him. I thought it'd be nice to have him in town. And last minute, Dillinger came in and got him a plane ticket back home for a week and a half. But the team was supposed to stay there and train, but he was smart getting out. He wasn't ready. That race alone damn near killed him. It was just so hot. You know who Myra Shifter was? He was world record holder at the time. Ethiopia. Yeah. And he probably would have won it, but he miscounted the laps and just stopped and stood there, and Pre kept on going.
Coach, one of the things that I always enjoy about you is that you can look at an athlete and know what his or her deficiencies are. If you were in charge of Steve's training between 72 and 76, what would you have done to get him a medal? Differently.
Let him cuss me up every day, probably. And working with different athletes takes a different approach, and Bill Barman was pretty sharp with it. He didn't hit him with the direct frontals too often because Pre couldn't have taken it. And the same with Dillinger. Dillinger had an Olympic medal too, by the way, the assistant coach. And so they just figured out how to work with him, and that was rather than fight with him all the time. I'd love to have a chance to work with him. I was hoping like hell to get him up there. I wasn't going to tell him what to do, just to make sure he got to do it. That's all.
So you think if he just had another 4 years to mature, it's some international experience?
It'd have been hell on wheels. I mean, he'd have gotten the right kind of training. Well, he was getting almost. You know, they mentioned Lydiard in there. That was Bolland in the Lydiard system, which is the best anyway. If you're not doing that, you're never going to mount the hill of beans. And Pre was on it pretty much. You build it. The system is you build a lot of distance, then you can move the speed late. You can't do it without an awful lot of running. He was doing that pretty much. Town like Eugene, lots of support. Like they said, the stadium now seats about 14,000. They've added to it, and it's an old, as they mentioned, Bill Hayward. He's the one that started track out there. Oregon, it rains a lot in the spring, so baseball never took off. But it was the kind of rain that helped track in the old days with the cinder tracks because it packed them. So track around the state was a big sport. We went over to Florence, Oregon. 6,000 people in town. They have all-weather track. I mean, the whole state. It's just a big deal, and that's why, like I said, people knew who Fredericks was because he got so close to Prefontaine. They covered track. People are more interested in track there than anything. Of course, now they have an 87,000 seat football stadium. The stadium you saw was the football stadium for a lot of years. Hayward Field. And the reason I know so much, I've been there 20 times. We got an Olympic medalist because I had been to that venue, and I knew damn well the wind came up every day at 3 o'clock. And it means you're going into that headwind. He was from Penn State. He was used to the headwind. He beat the 2 world record holders to make the Olympic team because they ran too fast into the headwind. And he ran 21.8 at 5 hurdles. That's almost 200 meters, so you know they're flying. They went 21.1. And when death came, oh, I loved it.